Check, check, check. Okay, that's me. How about Marie and Glenn?
Saying things.
All right,
history.
now I
Okay.
think we are rocking and rolling. Let me make sure I can hear us as well. All right. And all right. Ooh, I'm very loud. Sorry, friends.
She's
well, hello.
loud.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I think we're rocking and rolling now. So, welcome to LoFi History. I bet most of you are returning viewers of LoFi History. But if you are not, and if this is your first time joining us, welcome. I'm Libba, and we have Glenn and Marie, our historians extraordinaire, and I will be hosting, making sure that we get your questions answered. So I see, we would love to know where you're watching from if you are new to us. And I see we've already got a question coming in, but go ahead, get those questions in. But we're going to start with something that we always do at the very beginning of LoFi History, and that is, what are you wearing? So why don't we start today? Glenn, that's a lovely multi-era... a multi-society outfit you've got going on.
There are two aspects to this. One is that it is a hunting frock and round hat that would be appropriate to the first 3 decades or so of the 19th century. The hunting frock would be the outer gear for someone going hunting or for militia duty, and the round hat is very typical of the time. We think of these as top hats and very formal now, but this is the sort of hat they would wear. But I must also confess that what I am wearing is sort of the costume of shame here at the History Center.
Oh, no, not the costume of shame.
It's the costume of shame when we don't have anything else to wear because I hurt my back.
Yeah.
But wait, I have a story with that.
Oh, do
That's
tell.
related to
Do
history.
tell.
Because as often happens, things happen. And I think about it from a historical perspective.
Right.
And laying in bed last night, grumbling and having taken exceeding amounts of ibuprofen, I was thinking, back in the day, there are a lot of period sources that talk about so-and-so was a very ornery and grumpy person. And I started to think, they had no pain mitigation other than alcohol.
Right.
And so there are drunkards in the past and there are grumpy people. And I was like, I wonder if I felt like this and had no way to deal with it and still had to work on the farm or do the things.
Right.
I would be I'm already ornery and grumpy. Can you imagine what it would be if I had nothing to mitigate the pain?
Right.
And I'm like, I sincerely think that the more I thought about it, that is a significant descriptor of many people in the past, men and women and children.
Point. I mean, learning about history makes you thankful for a whole lot.
A whole lot that we have, yeah, because, imagine you pull your back, you are working on a farm in the 1700s and you pull a muscle in your back. You don't get vacation time, you don't have health care, there's no aspirin, and you just have to either lay there and let your family starve, or you have to go do something about it and just work through the pain. And that's going to make people grumpy and hateful and drink to deaden the pain. It's like, wow, I get it.
No wonder.
So
Yes.
so that's why I have on the costume of shame today.
There's
Oh.
also tree bark that you can chew that has an ingredient in aspirin, but you had to know which tree.
There is, and that
chew on
but
it.
that was not a universally known
Oh, no.
remedy.
No, it was
Right, this is-
specific to certain cultures.
Right,
Oh,
right.
yeah.
And see, that's the thing. You can't just say, well, they had tree bark and things like that they could chew. It's
Well,
like,
certain cultures did.
they may not have. They
Right.
may have had 20% alcohol beer, and that was it,
Yeah.
which sounds pretty good right now.
Well-
Marie, what are you wearing?
Yes.
So I am dressed in my Lady of Shalott costume based on
Ooh.
the painting from the Gilded Age, based on the poem from the Romantic Age, based on the legend of King Arthur from myth. But this is an interesting chance to talk about medievalism,
Yeah.
which is so fun. I also love these sleeves.
I love the sleeves.
It
Yes.
makes me very happy. I look like
Oh,
little
the things you could hide within these sleeves.
Right? The secrets. I'm also gonna find.
Yes.
I'm gonna find that painting that you're talking about while you
Yes.
describe.
Lady of Shalott's painting.
Yes.
So Medievalism is something that we generally think of when you think about like medieval fantasy. That's kind of what we are talking about a little bit, because the Victorians especially romanticized the heck out of the medieval period. The Georgians did as well. Windsor Castle, most of it is not actually a medieval castle. There are bits and pieces of a medieval castle within this building that was really done in the early 19th century that was look medieval, but it's like this lovely, pretty, romanticized version of what a medieval castle should have looked like. It's not an actual medieval castle.
Well,
And-
parts of it are.
well, that's I mean,
The Bailey, the
yes.
Mott is.
there's like the one part.
But then they just kept building outward. It's like, well, the medieval part that's left doesn't look medieval to us. Let's make it look medieval.
Right.
Yeah.
18th century medievalism.
Oh,
Yes.
that's fun.
So that's the kind of like, so that this dress is medieval in the terms of medievalism, as in it's a pretty inspired kind of version of what we think would look medieval, but it's actually nothing like what medieval.
And what many people think is medieval is, as you say, really just medievalism.
I
Yes.
see. Well, here is this beautiful painting, which you really got it kind of spot on.
Thank
there.
you, thank you.
that's pretty good and
Thank you.
very beautiful. So, I see
went-
that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
This is one of the first times I used my embroidery machine on an
Oh,
outfit, and it
nice.
made me very,
Oh,
I'm very
yeah.
excited about it. I'm still very excited about how it turned out.
Yeah. So I see we've got Thomas. Hello, Thomas. Good to see
Hey.
you. I see we've also got Josh here. Hello, Josh. And Thomas says, Thomas from Kentucky, that is, a few weeks ago, Glenn mentioned the Zimmerman telegram. Ironically, it came up in virtual trivia later that night, but we didn't know the countries. Anything you want to share about the relationship between Germany and Mexico at that time? And for folks who are not already familiar with the Zimmerman telegram, Glenn, this seems like a question for you since you mentioned it last time.
So imagine, if you will, it is World War One. And Germany is trying to pull in more allies to fight against the Entente, Britain, France, and later on, spring 1917, the United States. And so the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany's ally, is not doing very well. Turkey seems to be on the the Ottoman Empire at this point seems to be on the ropes, and they're trying to find ways to bring people in on their side. And so Zimmerman was a German diplomat who said, well, here's an idea. If the United States is in the war now, maybe if we got Mexico to go to war with them, they would be mostly preoccupied with their southern border. They would be more interested in fighting against Mexico rather than sending all their soldiers and stuff over here. So here's what I'll do. I will send them a secret telegram in code that says, Dear Mexico, how are you? We are fine. Would you like to join us and attack the United States? We will give you arms. We will send men. We will send you airplanes. And you can regain all the territory you lost in the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 48. This was intercepted by the British and decoded, because the British are very good at intercepting coded and decrypted things. Yes, that's perfect. So Britain doesn't immediately show this. They hold on to it, and they release it at a very special time, just when America's like, should we enter the war? Should we not? And Great Britain goes, oh yes, America, by the way, we found this telegram floating out there. And the Mexicans were like, oh, we have nothing to do with that. So it would have been very easy for the Germans to say, oh, the British have made this up to force you to get into the war, United States. You should ignore it. But Zimmerman, the German diplomat, says, yeah, we sent it. And America was like, really? Yes. Or, yeah. And so the United States was like, well, Mexico, do you want any of this? And Mexico's like, no. And so the United States says, okay, well, we'll go to war with Germany because of this Zimmerman telegram. So that, in a nutshell, is the Zimmerman telegram. It is very interesting. Even more interesting would be, what if Mexico had said, maybe. Wouldn't that have been interesting to see trench warfare along the Rio Grande? Well, interesting, maybe not fun.
Right. So I hope that next time the Zimmerman telegram comes up in a virtual trivia, that you and Thomas will now
That's right.
have even more to
I
tell
hope-
them about it.
I hope you won.
Yes, I bet you did. I bet you did. At least very well, because Thomas was an excellent student. So we also have Joshua is here, and Joshua, yes, Joshua has our famous what if questions.
What if?
So I've got to get our your hat's in the way. There we go. Let's do it again. And what if? So Joshua is one of our regulars who has great what if questions. So today's what if by Joshua is: what if Hoover somehow won another election in 1932? What would he have done to combat the Depression if he would do anything more than he already was doing? All right, so I know both of you are familiar with this era of history. Perhaps you could both tell us, what do you think he would have done? Because as far as I understood, when I learned so much in homeschool, our homeschool connection class, that there was a bit of frustration with the way that President Hoover was handling the Depression, and of course, many people probably know of
he didn't.
Hoovervilles. Yeah, right.
I
So,
don't think
what's
he
your
would
take?
have done anything. He said this would have. I think if he had won another term, which there's no way, because he was like, "This is not my problem. This is your problem. So I'm not going to do anything." He just would have done nothing, because he very much believed that it was not the government's place to get in and to fix this free market situation. I think he would have done pretty much nothing. He might have been forced, as conditions progressively got worse, to do something, but I think that would have been very circumstantial. It would have been like situations got so bad and public pressure got so hard that it forced him to finally do something. I do not think he would have actively on his own accord done something.
What about you, Glenn?
Yeah,
What's your take on
I
this?
tend to generally agree with that. I don't think, I don't think he would have had a chance to win either. I think if Hoover thought he had a chance to win, he probably would have made an announcement saying that I will not seek nor will I accept a second term, is how much he wanted out of this. He just wanted out. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's pure speculation, since we're purely speculating. The thing about Hoover is Hoover was a remarkably talented and intelligent person, right? He wasn't just bumbling away in the office of president. He actually made a conscious decision to say, well, maybe this will straighten itself out. In 3 years' time, who knows if it would have? I mean, that's the real question, is what if, not what would have Hoover done, but assuming that Hoover would have done nothing, what would have happened? Because you have to remember, when FDR gets in there, and a lot of the things he tries to do in his first couple of years don't work, right? The United States just sank deeper into the Depression in Roosevelt's first year and a half or so. It wasn't until after that, till other things started coming into play, and more of his program started to seem to work, that things started to improve. But even in that initial time when they started working around 35, 36, it was mostly because of government spending. Not necessarily the individual programs, but the fact that the government was spending so much money, right? It's Keynesian economics. The government's throwing money into the economy. When there's a huge amount of money coming into a depressed economy, things are naturally going to rise. The government eventually starts to have to cut back on that spending, and when the government started cutting back on that spending, the improvements that happened under FDR also started to roll back. And it wasn't until, thank goodness, World War II comes along and really pulls the entire world out of the Depression.
Right.
So there's, that is a huge speculation. There's no way to guess.
But it's fun to guess.
It's fun to guess. I think that World War II was on its way anyway.
It's World War I Part 2.
Yeah,
One part
basically. Elizabeth makes the point that Elizabeth says, I didn't realize that Hoover lived so long after his presidency, 30 years. What a span of history to watch.
Right.
I often think about that when you hear of someone who's passed away and lived a very long life. It seems like no matter what time, what age you're born into, that big changes are going to come your way, and but in particular, I mean, Hoover, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know how old he was when he took the presidency, but probably was born in the late 1800s, and then
he was in his early 50s, I think. So comparatively, compared to many presidents, a comparatively young man.
Yeah. So, Alma and Gabby are here. Hello, Alma and Gabby. Alma says, Gabby made me write down her question.
Okay.
Her show is this week because Gabby, for any new viewers, is our returning fan who asks about many musicals. So that's always fun. Gabby's show today is Tuck Everlasting. Oh, very wonderful story. Her question is, if you were a Tuck, someone who could live forever and lived forever, what would be your favorite time period, or what would be your most amazing historical event you would live through? And of course, Tuck Everlasting takes place in 1881. But please let Gabby know that's a very fun question. What's your favorite time period? And what would be the historical event you lived through? If you were a Tuck and lived forever, what would... Okay, so I think what the question is let's say you're a Tuck in 1881-ish, and we've lived up to this point. What would have been your favorite or most interesting historic event from the 1880s-ish to now? They're thinking.
We're thinking.
Not the Great Depression.
I personally feel like I would have wanted to check out, like, just see what was going on in the 1920s, since it was such a... I mean, I don't want the Spanish flu. I'd know what to do,
well,
at least.
We're done with the Spanish flu by 21 or so.
Yeah.
And we'd live forever anyway, so
right.
we'd be immune.
Does not affect us, apparently.
Have you ever tried immortality?
Have we tried this as a solution to disease?
Yes. So I think luckily if I could be immune to all death, then yeah, I think the 20s would be like, let's see what this is all about. That'd be really fun. What about y'all?
I definitely would want to go and like try to be a flapper in the 20s.
Yes.
I think that would be just fun. I do also think that early 1900s, pre-World War I would be an interesting time, kind of because it's like the Edwardian in Great Britain, and on its own it wasn't that great, but then when you look at all the terrible things that happened like before or after it actually was like, I can see why people like that time period. Like, it's nice.
It's the turn of the century. It's exciting. New fashions, especially. Yeah.
Ice cream, like, come on. Electric lights, cars.
Sort of telephones coming along.
Yeah, like I think that would be an interesting time period.
Yeah,
like that one in the 1920s.
Yeah,
would be interesting.
Fighting for women's suffrage too.
Oh, I see. You already get that in 1920.
That's true, but
but in the early 1900s, you're immortal, so you gotta help when you can.
I guess so.
Oh, Clavion is here. Hey, Clavion. Hey. Clavion says, so happy to see you all again. Nice hat. Yes, I know our lo-fi schedule has sort of been all over the place, but we're so glad to be here today, and I'm so glad you got to join us. So, Glenn, you look like you were thinking pretty hard on that question.
So if I have to go post 1880, I am actually going to jump into the 30s.
Okay.
Even though it's the Depression, but... all the cool old movies that I like. The 30s were just full of adventure, right? This is exploring ruins and Indiana Jones and international travel on big turboprop planes.
Wait, hold on.
And
Indiana Jones was a movie in the 30s?
No, but it's set in the 30s.
Right?
It's set in the 30s.
What?
No, and so you've got all this potential adventure stuff. Right?
I see. Yes.
You can go around the world and be an archaeologist and a historian.
Yeah.
Or a ne'er-do-well. You can be a spy. You can wear fedoras.
Fedoras are back.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm gonna have to get. And now this is a sort of a fantasy take on things, but I mean we're already immortal, so we're already there.
Yeah. So you're fine.
So yeah, I'm definitely gonna go with the 1930s.
In America.
Everywhere. I'm going to travel everywhere.
The world. Yes, I love
Being an immortal, I've already learned about 15 to 20 languages, so I can travel incognito in a variety of countries.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Excellent question, Gabby, and thanks, Alma. Please let her know that was a really fun question. And I see that. Oh yes, I wanted to also get to questions from last time, from our last session. We didn't get around to. So while we're going back to these questions, folks that are watching now, if you would like to chat your question, Glenn and Marie will answer them live. So last time we were on, Karen was asking about schools and teachers. We had gotten on the conversation about the first public schools, and Karen was wondering where would a community get a teacher? I mean, how would you, especially with a rural community, how would you find a teacher willing to come to a rural community and teach there, especially if you're a community that doesn't have a lot of money? What were your options as far as we need a teacher for our kids? What to do?
So there were sort of itinerant teachers that could travel and to make a living. They might, almost like a circuit riding preacher, they would be circuit riding teachers and maybe teach at 2 or 3 different schools at a time. A community might put an ad in the nearby local newspaper. Now, because that's how people communicate, and people are going to put out ads for that, and they're going to ask for teachers. There's not a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Accreditation. Let's say accreditation. Right.
Yeah.
So it was.
Find a smart person in the town.
Yeah, and
got some time to teach children.
Yeah. Now, and one way you could lure them, even if your community was not very wealthy and you couldn't pay them very much, what you could do is say, well, you can stay at our house or each other's houses around about. You'll get your room and board paid for, which is a significant thing, right? If you today. Yeah. How much of our salary goes to our room and board, as it were. So if your room and board is provided, any cash you make is just going to be extra.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and there were enough people with somewhat of a higher education. Early on, it was usually men who did this, but as time went by, it did become one of those professions that opened up to women. Really around the post-Civil War era is when that started to be something that was open to women.
Especially, and then it really took off after World War I, when all the men went away in World War I, and then women were able to fill a lot of what were considered men's roles. That's when you have post-Civil War is definitely started, but then World War I, as we say, war is an acceleration of growth and change. So World War I hits, and then women as nurses and teachers, it accelerates greatly.
Yeah, and of course today the larger demographic of teachers are women today, so it's interesting that it started then and still continues today.
And to use what I still consider a primary source, one of the books of the later Laura Ingalls Wilder stuff is of her being one of those teachers in one of those towns, and how miserable she found it, because she was getting room and board from one of the families. And it was a little, almost closet that she slept in.
A little house.
It was a little closet on the prairie, and all that she had was a curtain that pulled across. And when she said, as soon as she pulled that curtain, the man and the woman she was living with just started yelling and screaming and fighting with each other, and she would just lay there and wait for sleep to come and wake up, go teach the kids, and then fortunately, her beau Almanzo would come and get her on Friday afternoon and take her back home to be with him and her family. Yeah. But then he'd have to take her back Sunday evening.
Oh goodness, yeah.
So
I'm sure that's. I mean, given that Laura Ingalls Wilder was very good about keeping things historically accurate. I mean, it's not to say that she didn't embellish, her memories, but in the story, but the actual material culture in the books, Karen, if you're rewatching this, then that would probably be a really great source to learn what it would be like for a woman. What would that be, in the early 1900s?
That's the 1880s.
Okay, yeah.
And from what I understand, perhaps not all, but most of the events she describes are by and large truthful. She may have embellished some of the details to make them more interesting or more poignant or more impactful, but the events, why would she write about that if it wasn't true? Right? It was because she talks about how miserable she was being in that situation for the
Yeah.
entire school semester.
I'm sure that was a shared experience among
I'm
many,
sure it
many
was.
other
That's
women.
the problem when you room with strangers
Right.
on the prairie.
Clavion says sounds like the Harry Potter experience.
Oh, no.
Stuck in a closet listening to people argue. Good point. So another question we didn't get to last time, which is actually another what if from Josh, is what if Theodore Roosevelt won a third term in 1912? What would he do about Europe during World War I? So what do you think his stance would have been if he were to remain president during World War I? And maybe, because I don't know a ton about Theodore Roosevelt, could you introduce us to his presidential style or his administrative style? Like the big overarching...
He's very interesting. He was about the federal government being powerful so that it could do the right and good thing. He was less concerned. He was not a strict constitutionalist, you could say. There's an example of him. He's very much an outdoorsman. He's very much a naturalist.
Right.
And so there was this area that he was afraid and had gotten letters about that was going to be developed, but it was teeming with wildlife, especially birds, right? And he was so worried about what can we do about this? And finally he was with one of his advisors and he says, John, I don't know if that's the guy's name. John, is there anything in the Constitution that prevents the president from naming a bird sanctuary on federal property? And John says no. He's like, very well. I then declare that there is a bird sanctuary on this piece of federal property and it may not be developed. Done. And so that's how he operated.
So he was, sounds like ways that other presidents would try to, fulfill their agenda, but it also,
right.
It's legal.
He's very loosey-goosey with what the powers of the president are. But he does it for things that he thinks are right. He does not abuse power, but he does use power as much as he can. He was also an American imperialist that goes all the way back to when he was Undersecretary of the Navy, and he resigned from that so that he could go lead men in Cuba and charge up next to San Juan Hill. So he's very much an American imperialist. I think, all that said, that he would have very immediately gotten the United States involved in World War I as quickly as he could, because our army was tiny, but our navy, it wasn't bad.
All right.
It was no British Royal Navy, but it was like the third or fourth largest navy in the world, and it would have made a huge difference. And I'm very sure he probably would have wanted to go in on the side of Britain and France, even though he kind of had a towards the British.
Yeah.
Did not like him.
Yeah.
I think to summarize Theodore Roosevelt in one quote, which was from him, is speak softly and carry a big stick.
Ah, yes, definitely. So, when it comes to his personality, though, I don't think it doesn't sound like he did speak softly very often, though.
No.
Yeah,
I don't think he took his own advice.
He was larger than life. He was giving a speech. Someone shot him, and they captured the would-be assassin. He finishes the speech and then goes to the hospital.
Wow.
Right? So.
Yeah. So it's a good question, Josh. That's a really good what if.
He's going to be looking for a war for America, no matter what. So, which is not, that's probably not the best thing.
But would you say that he's looking for a war to expand power?
Yes, to ensure America's role on the world stage as a great player in the great game of empire.
Mm-hmm. Now, Woodrow Wilson is after him, right?
Yes.
So, did Woodrow Wilson greatly differ from the Roosevelt style of thinking?
Yes.
About being like a worldwide power?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So, Wilson, I think, wanted to keep out of the war in terms of the conflict, but he was very interested in leveraging America's economic and political power during the war. He often would invite the powers at war. He tried to be the associative country that would bring them to the table to negotiate. He pressed power on Germany when they went to unrestricted submarine warfare. He used America's economic might when Britain and France were looking for loans. He's like, sure, but you're going to have to do things a certain way. And then when he finally decided that it was time for America to go into the war, he didn't go in. And this is the interesting, when you read his letter when Congress declared war, what Wilson did is, and I may be bringing us a little too close to the modern era, Wilson created a foreign policy that the United States has stuck with for over 100 years.
Oh, wow.
By which I mean a Wilsonian foreign policy is, we're going to use American power, economic, political, military, to make the world safe for democracy. That's why he said they were going into the First World War, not to conquer territory, not to necessarily crush the Germans, but to make the world safe for democracy and export democracy wherever it could be exported. And he was going to do that with American might, however that might reflected. And since that day, if you look at American foreign policy and political history, that's more or less what we've tried to do, right?
Yeah.
When we were hesitant to get into World War II, but when we got in there and we crushed Germany and Japan, what did we go to great lengths to set up? Representative democracies. When we went into South America, what did we try to do? Set up representative democracies. When we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, what did we try to do? Set up representative democracies.
Right, yeah.
Whether the people there wanted them or not.
Right.
And that all goes back to Wilson. So in the end, one could argue that Wilson was worse for America than Theodore Roosevelt would have ever been.
Well, what's your take on that, Marie? Do you feel like
I feel strongly about Mr. Wilson's practices as president. Full disclosure.
Well, I think. Wait, what was the original question?
Well, I was talking about the differences between because the question was, had Roosevelt gone into World War I, how would things be different? Do you feel like Roosevelt and Wilson had significantly different points of view on, especially that exporting of democracy?
To answer your question, I don't think Roosevelt would have been interested in exporting democracy. He wanted to go out, beat the Germans and the Turks and the Austro-Hungarians,
come home,
and then come home.
And maybe claim territory.
And get some territory.
He was okay with claiming territory.
But that was going to be American colonies, not independent republics.
Like they would be like Puerto Rico.
Right.
It's part of America, but not going to be like a state.
Right.
I think Wilson won because he was so different than Theodore Roosevelt. Not necessarily in policy-wise. That's like the hard part. In personality-wise, he was very different.
Right.
He was very quiet.
A bit more demure.
A bit more demure.
He spoke softly.
More, perhaps. But then also he was very much an isolationist to a point where he did not want to get involved in World War I, and no one really in America wanted to get involved in World War I because they were like, that is a European problem, that is not us. So I think that's probably I think one of his slogans that he ran on was keeping America out of World War.
Well, his second term, that was his slogan. He kept us out of war.
Oh, yes. Wow. Yeah.
So that was definitely a thing
in 16,
got him reelected. Is yay, look at the mess that's in Europe. We're not a part of it. But then we end up being part of it because Zimmerman Telegram and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But he still wanted America to be a great power in the world. And I don't think that there is a president who was like, you know what America needs? Less power.
Right.
There's not necessarily, I don't think you get to that office wanting to not have power.
Right.
So I think it was just a different kind of power and a different type of might that he wanted to leverage.
Yeah.
And still wanted to make America a great world power, but I think he thought keeping America out of the war is going to make America a great power because then we're not going to lose people and lives and possibly get beaten.
Right. That's a good point. Josh has yet another what if. This one is actually something I can kind of talk about because I've been researching Alexander Graham Bell for our programs, and Josh asks, what if Alexander Graham Bell's metal detector worked in finding President Garfield's bullet and saved him? Garfield would have been on a feather bed and his bullet not so deep within his body for this scenario to work. What would have Garfield done with the rest of his presidency? So I actually just recently learned about this.
Go, Libba.
So, of course, we all know Alexander Graham Bell as the inventor of the telephone, even though there's some dispute about who did that first.
Controversy.
But certainly the inventor of the telephone as we know it, today. And but him being an inventor, and many inventors, they're not going to invent just one thing. They are inventors. They are going to look for problems and solve it, and the world is full of problems to solve. So Bell is always seeking those problems, but audio and electricity were one of his fascinations. And so when President Garfield, there's an attempted assassination on his life, and
turns out to be a successful one.
Eventually. Yes. He doesn't immediately die.
Yes.
So he's got this bullet lodged in him, and Bell is very confident that he can. He's been using instruments that can detect metal at very shallow surfaces, and he thinks that this could work to detect the bullet and to determine whether where is the bullet. So that they can attempt to save President Garfield's life. Unfortunately, this does not work, and it's kind of a big embarrassment for Bell because he's now he just looks like a failure, even though his instrument, it did work, just not the bullet was likely just too deep to detect. So really, this comes around to Josh's question is basically what would have happened if this had succeeded. Let's say, yes, they get the bullet out and everything goes fine from there, which often case would not be the case.
He still could have died of infection.
Definitely at this point.
Very high probability.
Yes. So it's not Alexander Graham Bell's fault for not saving him, but. Tell us about Garfield's presidency, because I don't feel like President Garfield is one that is really like, yes, President Garfield, the president who did that.
Is it cat? Yeah.
Yes. So tell us about President Garfield and what his legacy is, and what do you think, how would his legacy have continued in the presidency if he had survived? Who wants to answer that first?
So let's set the stage, right?
Yes.
When was Garfield president? He was president after the American Civil War, but before the turn of the century, and I believe the 1880s.
Yeah, I'm gonna fact check that. So President Garfield is assassinated in 1881. So you are correct. The 1880s.
All right. So there ain't that much going on in America at this point. We're trying to rebuild from the American Civil War and remend the fabric that is the American states, and trying to have all that come back together. Garfield, I don't think he didn't really do much.
Well, he was assassinated so early in his presidency, so he runs. Reconstruction ends in 1877. And
so he's like right after that.
He's after that. And so what he's doing, there has been an economic depression, the panic of 73 that folks are just starting to get out of. Folks are done with trying to fix the South with Reconstruction. And we're entering into that period that's sort of that Gilded Age era. And people are starting to recognize, especially after the Grant administration and after the Hayes administration, there is a ton of corruption at the highest levels of government. So Garfield, in effect, runs on this reformist platform. As a matter of fact, I can't remember exactly who his assassin was, but I know that after he shot him, that he was a member of the Stalwarts, which is a subset of the Republican Party, that they felt that Garfield had betrayed them. And Libby, you may have to look it up, because when they captured the assassin, who turns out to have had he had brain issues.
Oh, I see.
Right, and so when he was captured, he let out his will and testament when they captured him was like 3 or 4 sentences long as they're wrestling him to the ground, and it's like, just get on with why you killed him.
Yeah,
so,
I'm looking at his name was Charles Guiteau. Says he was an American writer and lawyer. He falsely believed he had played a major role in Garfield's victory,
right.
For which he should have been rewarded with a consulship. He was so offended by this perceived rejection. Yes, that he decided to shoot President Garfield at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington. Wow. And just a quick point that Susan also makes, speaking of Garfield's death, it was due to sepsis, and
right.
so many doctors, like Susan says, were poking in there.
Because they couldn't find the ball, right? And that was the whole point. They dig, and they're like, we can't find the ball. Well, can you use your machine to find the ball? Oh, sure. Beep, beep, beep. I can't find it, so they kept digging further.
Just leave it in there.
Garfield, it takes him like over 2 months to die from this gunshot wound.
Right.
Probably an excruciating amount of time because people are digging around. The wound's not healing because they think they have to get the ball out. Sepsis sets in. It's infection. He eventually dies of sepsis, which is a horrible way to go.
Yeah.
So he was set to try to reform and sort of redeem the Republican Party, and try to pull it away from what it had started to be seen as, such as the Northeastern big business conglomerate, and they had been, again, with the Grant administration, there had been so much corruption and so many scandals with Grant. Hayes's entire presidency was because of the corrupt bargain, right? That's how he got in 77. We'll make you president if you end Reconstruction of the South. So that had reflected very poorly.
Wow. Yeah.
So here comes Garfield, who's supposed to try to fix it all. He's more of a friend of the little man than of big business, but he gets assassinated by this fellow, and that Gilded Age corruption just sort of keeps on cruising along.
Do you think the Gilded Age would have been so gilded if he had lived and like the big monopolies hadn't happened?
I don't know how much, even as president, he could have. He probably could have slowed it down, but I don't know if he could have stopped it. Remember that from Abraham Lincoln until 1912, every president was a Republican. Woodrow Wilson was the first Democratic president since before the Civil War. Yeah. Right. And so that whole thing sets the tone. The Republican Party had become very corrupt. The African American ability to vote had been crushed, especially in the South. So their ability to sort of help set Republican Party policy, like it had been pre-Civil War and at the very first years of Reconstruction, had disappeared. And so you start, and that's when, in reaction to the continuation of corrupt national and state and local politics, you start to get progressives who are coming on board, first at the local state levels, and then you get more and more people saying it's time to change the government, it's time to make it work for the common people, it's trying to progress, right? It's time to make it something that works for everyone. That's when you start getting these progressive party people coming in, which is how trying to tie it all together too, which is how Wilson comes in. That's the interesting thing. The election of 1912 is one of the most interesting and significant in the 20th century because every single candidate was a progressive.
That's cool. I'm going to write that down. That might be fun to dive into a little more at a later time.
Yeah. So, and that, the progressive era sort of peaks right before World War One.
Yeah. Excellent points all around, and a great what if, as usual, Josh. I see we have. Elizabeth also says, very interesting reading about Theodore Roosevelt's wives, and sad. I don't know anything about his wives. Are you familiar?
Theodore Roosevelt?
Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt's wives.
His first wife. Oh, I'm gonna tear up thinking about it. So he's from New York. He's originally from New York. I don't know all the details, but I do know that the woman he married was the absolute love of his life. And he was also very much a mama's boy. He adored his mother. And so sickness enters into the Roosevelt house. His mother falls very ill. His wife falls very ill in the same house.
Oh,
He's
no.
going back and forth to their rooms over the period of several days. And first one, I can't remember the order. First one dies,
I
and
think
then
it's
the other
his
dies.
wife, and then it's his mother.
And
Oh,
it's like in the
on
same day.
Wow. Oh, that's
And
awful.
so he is just absolutely crushed. He gives up politics. This is when he decides to go out west and basically find himself anew.
Now, is that what? Am I correct in thinking Theodore Roosevelt equals Rough Riders?
Yes.
Is that when that whole thing
That happens a little later.
Oh, okay.
That happens a little later. So he goes out west to refine himself and recenter himself, because he had actually always been a very sickly child and young man with consumption.
Because we always think of him as being this
Right.
like strapping,
Yeah.
like rough rider, but like that did not come about
Interesting.
until much later. He really reinvents himself. He was
Yeah.
very sickly.
Yeah, very sickly. And then he goes west. He basically says, the only way I can get out of this funk is I want to be a cowboy. So he goes out west and becomes a cowboy, right?
Hey, you know?
Because they forget that he's this.
Well, it makes sense. You're away from everything that reminds you of your life. You're
Right.
communing with nature.
People out west don't know who he is. They don't know he's a
Right.
New York socialite
Yeah.
who held office.
Would he have had a lot of interaction with Native Americans out there, or would it have been?
Some probably, not
Yeah, just
a very
curious.
close
Yeah.
relationship, but
Mm.
I'm sure he would have run into them.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, then that's when he gets that buff, strong sense of
I see.
this is what it is to be an American. This is what it is to be healthy.
Mhm.
He gets that attitude of being a rough guy,
Yeah.
and then gets back into politics eventually. And that's when the whole Spanish-American War Rough Riders things happen.
Interesting.
And then eventually he gets married again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have 6 children together. And all 6 of these children move into the White House with them.
Whoa.
Which the White House had not seen that many children. Usually, presidents are older and their
Right.
children are grown and gone.
Yeah.
For most of history, that's how this works. And it's very rare when you have a child in the White House, especially so many, and also ones that are so young.
Right.
And rambunctious.
And rambunctious. They kind of terrorized the White House a little bit. They like slid down the staircase on cookie sheets, and like they had like a small menagerie of pets that they just like had in the White House.
Yeah.
And this is something that you might know if you are one of our members and
That's
watched our
right.
digital program on the White House. But they needed more room so badly for all of these children in the White House that the temporary executive office, now we know as the West Wing, was built so that they could move all of the president's office, which had been on the private floor, the upper floor of the White House. That's where the president's office had been since the time of James Madison. That was then moved to the West Wing. Still not the Oval Office. That doesn't come about till later.
Yeah.
That's like Taft who builds the first Oval Office. But the first like executive office that's in the West Wing is with FDR. Not FDR. My bad. Wrong Roosevelt.
Yes.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes.
During
Make
his
room for those
administration.
kids. That's
My
funny.
also favorite first child, hands down, Alice
Yeah.
Roosevelt.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
She ran amok and did whatever the heck she wanted to do. And people got on to Theodore Roosevelt being like, hey, like, your daughter is just doing, like,
Being very ladylike.
she's not being ladylike. Could you stop that? And he said, I can either run the country or I can control Alice. Choose which one.
That's great. Oh, that's awesome. So I see, hello, Carol. Good to
Hello.
see you. Carol asks, how was news of emancipation spread and enforced throughout the southern states during the Civil War? That's so this happens.
So,
how does it get
Carol,
known?
do you mean the Emancipation Proclamation news or the
Yes.
actual 13th Amendment news?
How? Oh, okay. Well, the
On a
exact
s-
wording is how was news of emancipation spread and enforced throughout the state. So that's a good point. It may not be specifically the Emancipation Proclamation.
Mhm.
Just all right, you're officially free. How do they know?
So, slave owners tried to suppress this information as much as they could, because if the enslaved knew that if they could just get to Union lines, they would be free. And this happened. They start trying to run away a lot, especially the closer the Union Army gets. And then as the depending upon which general, because you have to remember, the North might have been anti-slavery, but they were not necessarily not racist.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily. They want to end slavery for a lot of different reasons, and only one of those is because they consider that it might be immoral.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of other larger geopolitical concerns with the Union that they're concerned with, but depending upon the general, depending upon the colonel, as the further south they went, they would send out riders that would read this a summed up version of the proclamation. Basically, if you are a slave and you can hear this, you are now free. Come with us.
Wow.
And
is this after the Civil War?
No, this is during. So
during.
The Emancipation
Okay,
Proclamation
right.
is set out in 1862.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to take effect on January 1st, 1863, but they started enforcing it before that because they could. Right? Because these are not separate countries. They are states in rebellion, which gave Lincoln the authority to do this.
Of course, the Confederate States did not view themselves in such a way.
Right.
And therefore did not
so how
respond.
Would they...
It was only the Union that
Glenn was
talking
absolutely.
about that actually came and told them such things.
So for a person who's enslaved to actually gain their freedom, they would have to go away, like, with the Union Army?
Yes, they had to be freed by the Union Army because in the Emancipation Proclamation freed all the slaves in the states and territories currently in rebellion.
But not border states.
Not border states. Kentucky, New York, Maryland, all those places still slavery was legal and protected by the United States government.
I don't think New York.
Parts of New York.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Parts of New York.
I didn't even know that.
So they had to, basically it freed all the slaves that Lincoln had no control over and that the North had no control over. But what it did is it set in motion, as Union armies continued to invade the South and the Confederate States, every enslaved person they come upon, they freed. That the law of the United States said, you are now and henceforth and forever free.
So, you're an enslaved person. You were told you're free. You go with the army. What happens next? Were there any steps to help? Like, how do they find shelter? How do they...
That's part of the trick.
Yeah.
We're going south to fight the secession. You can't stay with us. Unless you want to come along, get half rations, and do some of our manual labor, like build bridges or dig ditches, or cook our food, or clean our clothes, or things like that. Which, as an enslaved person, comparatively sounds pretty good.
Right. Like, that's a stepping stone to stability.
You have to wash. Yeah, if you want to stay with us, you're going to wash all of our clothes. But guess what? We'll give you $1 a week.
Right, which is.
And when you're done, you can leave us and head north.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That.
And
I understand that. Yeah.
It is a very complicated. The way the Emancipation Proclamation worked, was established, was proclaimed, and enforced is a very complicated thing that varied from locality to locality, from command to command, which is why it became so important late in the war to get the 13th Amendment passed that would end slavery everywhere for all time.
Right. I've got the Emancipation Proclamation as a topic for a longer program, so
That's
thank
a good
you.
one.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was excellent, Carol. Appreciate that. Susan asks, would Glenn and Marie consider posting on our new website, our fancy new website, by the way, a list of some of their favorite history and nonfiction books? That's a great suggestion, Susan. I'm sure we can whip that up pretty quick. I've got that.
How many do I get to pick?
You know what? We're going to limit you to your... I'd say top 10 for now.
Okay.
We'll switch it up.
Okay.
And this is nonfiction or historical fiction and nonfiction?
Oh yeah. I think historical fiction we could throw that in there too.
Is that
I'm
a
sure
different
lot
list?
Of
Do I get a different 10?
Yes.
Okay.
You're all limited to 50 books maximum. No, it's whatever you want. That's a great idea, Susan. Thank you so much. I've got that noted. Amy Beecham is here. That's my mom. Hi,
Yay!
Mom. My mom asks, speaking of news, tell me more about the role of people who traveled and told the news to others in past times, as in the movie news of the world. Yeah. So, we have these ideas of, especially when I think about like Greek or Roman or, antiquated messengers just running great distances to say
the
3
homodromos.
words.
That's right.
So yeah, like how long was the just like, I am a human here to deliver a message? Like when did that start? I'm sure we can't even say when it started, but and when did that sort of end, or what's the evolution of that?
That's a book.
And specifically, Amy asks about the news specifically. So were there people whose job it was to basically be like, I'm the town newspaper, blah blah blah.
The town crier.
The town crier, yeah.
So, in ancient Greek and later on in ancient Rome, when new laws were passed or events of significant historical importance would happen, they would be posted at the agora or at the forum, depending upon if you're talking Greece or Rome. So people would basically go there to those central areas and literally read the news that had been posted there. The homodromos, the folks who would go through ancient Greece and run so far, like Phidippides and those guys, were more messengers for events of magnificent import, like the victory at Marathon. But that was their job. Their job was to run back and forth, delivering messages, delivering news. And we're going way back here, but it was not reliable. You're talking about oral transmission of ideas. You're talking about the further away the thing happens that you need to report, it may not be reliable. You may not get it. Looking at the ancient Greeks, there's the Athenians sent a massive expedition to Sicily to try to conquer the island. Long story short, it gets absolutely defeated. Everyone is captured or killed. There's no one to send news back to Athens. So Athens doesn't know that these 30,000 people are dead and gone and captured until someone from like Italy, a merchant, sails into Athens, goes into a barber shop, and they start cutting their hair and having a conversation. And he's like, wow, sure is a pity what happened to your boys on Sicily.
Like, what?
And the barber's like, what? Yeah, they all got killed. You didn't hear?
Oh.
And the barber literally is like, excuse me, puts his knives and scissors down and runs to the agora and starts saying, the Sicilian expedition is destroyed. And that's how they got the news.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so, and moving from that point on, this is why you got your news primarily, at least in Western culture, through the social areas of town, the taverns, community gatherings like before and after church, things like that.
Or even in church.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Like the preachers are supposed to tell you things, especially like in England. Things that the king or queen wanted you to know could sometimes be disseminated through the pulpit.
But then you had to go to the tavern afterwards to get the real scoop.
Well, we do have a few more questions, so but we're at the end of our hour, and you might have noticed that this is a different time. So our next Lo-Fi history is going to be on the first Tuesday of every month. I know this is the second Tuesday. It was my birthday last week, and I had to leave to go see Hamilton, which was really fun. We can talk about Hamilton later. Anyway, it was really fun though. So our next Lo-Fi history is going to be on, looks like October 5th. Wow, October already. That is nuts. So October 5th will be our next Lo-Fi at 4:30 this time. And before you head out, we do have our September raffle. So this is a fun one. So yes, thank you. So we have, especially for any kids in your life, but really this is fun for anyone. We've got a handkerchief doll. We have
I made.
Yes, that Marie made, which is sort of a colonial era, right?
Yes, it was popular during that era, but it was, was also before and after then, but I would say the
Yeah.
height of his popularity is most well known for the colonial
Yeah,
era.
yeah. And then we got our little mascot plushie of Franklin D. Roostervelt, our home mascot. And we also have this is cool, it's a cross stitch, it's kind of like a beginner cross stitch called the All American Sampler. So if you've ever been interested in cross stitch, this will be an excellent introduction to it. And you can enter our raffle at bit.ly/September, Sept 21 goal. And it's $5 for every donation to enter the raffle. So, of course, the more that you donate, the more chances you have to win. And so we hope you will help us reach our goal this month. And of course, we do offer much more than Lo-Fi history. We have free live streams on the second Wednesday of every month. And every single Friday at 2 p.m., we have our members only live stream. So if you are interested in becoming a member, it's only $5 a month or $45 for the whole year. So quite a bargain. And our next one is actually going to be with Frederick Douglass, Mustafa Slack, who is a professional actor and living history interpreter. He's been with us for a few years, and he's going to be delivering an actual speech that Douglass gave at I believe it was the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society in April of 1865. So very close to the ending of the Civil War, and there's a lot that is in that message, in that speech, that you can gather about his reasoning and for his own beliefs of freedom and suffrage for everyone. And then he will be taking your questions live. So if you want to become a member, just go to our website and you'll see the membership page. I'll put a link in the chat as well. But we hope that you will also consider our raffle too. So thanks so much for hanging out with us, everybody. We will see you on the 5th. Bye.
Bye.